The film opens with a group of children playing while Agu, a young boy, narrates the war tearing apart their country. He tries to sell a broken TV, calling it an imaginary TV, but no one is interested, except for a soldier who buys it. Agu's family lives in a temporary safe zone, away from the fighting. His mother cares for them while his father, once a teacher, now helps refugees as the sector chief. For now, they live peacefully. One day, Agu, his brother, and some friends block a road with a branch, asking drivers for money. An old woman appears, scolding them and calling them thieves. Later at home, while having dinner, Agu's father notices the broken TV and figures out that Agu deliberately broke it to sell. Agu runs off, avoiding punishment. The next day, Agu hears about the war on the radio but isn't paying attention. Instead, he teases his grandfather, who is napping. Soldiers arrive in the village, and during a meeting, it's decided that women and children should flee to the capital while the men stay behind to protect their homes. Agu's parents argue over the decision. The next morning, Agu's father arranges for his wife and younger children to leave, but there's no room for Agu. He promises they will reunite later. Agu stays behind with his father, older brother, and grandfather. Soon, gunfire erupts in the village. Agu and his family hide, fearing for their lives as bullets fly. Agu's father spots a cannon aimed at their location. When it fires, their hiding place is hit. Those trying to flee are shot on sight. Agu's father and other men are accused of being rebel spies by government soldiers. He denies it, insisting they are only villagers. The soldiers bring the old woman to identify them. She doesn't recognize them, but hints they might be rebels. Despite Agu's father's pleas, the soldiers execute him and the other men. Agu and his brother try to escape, but his brother is killed. Agu runs on his own, hiding in the bushes for days. Eventually, Agu spots a boy and follows him, but the boy vanishes. Later, Agu is caught in another gunfight and attacked by the same boy. He's captured by soldiers from the native defense forces, who mistake him for a spy. Their leader, the commandant, questions Agu. After hearing Agu's story, the commandant decides he will join the NDF. The soldiers take Agu to their camp, where he is handed over for training. At mealtime, Agu isn't allowed to eat because he isn't a soldier yet. When he asks for food, a soldier tells him he has to earn it. Meanwhile, the commandant calls for Strika, the boy who captured Agu, as Agu's journey as a child soldier begins. The scene shifts to Agu beginning his training. During this, Agu prays to God, asking to see his mother again. Meanwhile, 2IC, the second in command, announces that the NDF is slowly winning the war. The recruits, including Agu, are lectured by another soldier about their rights and how the enemy is taking those rights away. Later, Agu and the other children officially become part of the NDF after completing their training, participating in a ritual for blessings, and undergoing an initiation ceremony. Afterward, the commandant orders the group to clear the area as they prepare to move out. The next day, the unit embarks on an ambush mission targeting a bridge. They wait for the right moment and successfully attack the enemy. Afterward, the commandant calls Agu forward and orders him to kill a captured man. The captive, pleading for his life, claims he is just a student, but the commandant strikes him and pressures Agu to carry out the execution. Reluctant and terrified, Agu eventually uses a machete to kill the man under the commandant's provocation. Strika is ordered to help Agu, and together they hack the man to death. Following this, the commandant instructs 2IC to give Agu a gun. Receiving the weapon overwhelms Agu, and he falls to his knees, vomiting. Later, he prays to God, confessing his actions. That evening, Strika approaches Agu, handing him clothes scavenged from the dead soldiers. Agu tries to talk to Strika, but Strika communicates only through gestures. The scene shifts to the commandant speaking to his soldiers about the food and women available in the next location they plan to target. During the conversation, a soldier brings in refugees and reports that their town has been captured by the enemy. The next day, 2IC leads a mission to retake a bridge. He requests backup, but the commandant ignores his plea, instead emphasizing the importance of 2IC's mission. The commandant calls Agu over and has him watch the battle through the scope of a gun. Later, the commandant leads his troops into the battle, and they engage in intense combat. When night falls, Strika brings Agu to the commandant. The commandant praises Agu's performance in battle, saying he reminds him of his younger self. He speaks about the importance of being a good follower to become a strong leader. Afterward, he invites Agu into his room. The commandant sniffs burnt gunpowder and lies down. He orders Agu to kneel, and the scene cuts away as the camera shifts outside the room. Outside, Strika silently helps Agu walk, offering quiet comfort to his friend. The next day, Agu appears distracted. A soldier notices and gives him a substance called brown, which gets Agu high. The commandant then informs the unit that their next destination is a village full of enemies. As they move out, UN vehicles drive past them. Eventually, Agu and the other soldiers arrive at the village and begin shooting indiscriminately. Inside a building, Agu discovers a woman and a child hiding. Believing the woman is his mother, Agu hugs her, but he soon realizes she isn't. Disappointed and angry, he lets go and calls her a witch. Meanwhile, Strika drags the child outside, where other soldiers begin beating him. Conflicted and broken, Agu asks God if he is watching as he shoots the woman, who is being assaulted by the other soldiers. The scene changes to the commandant observing his men as they place grenades into the mouths of their captives. At that moment, he receives a letter from Supreme Commander Dada Goodblood, summoning them. Before leaving, the grenades explode. The commandant orders one civilian to be spared so they can warn other villages of the NDF's approach. He then announces that Agu and Strika will now be permanent members of the squad. The unit marches onward, leaving devastation behind. The scene continues as the commandant and his squad arrive and are greeted by the deputy. The deputy leads them to a waiting area where a foreigner is already present, waiting to meet Supreme Commander Goodblood. After some time, the deputy calls on the foreigner first, leaving the commandant and his men waiting for a long time, which irritates the commandant. Eventually, the deputy apologizes and leads them to a room where they end up falling asleep while waiting. The next day, Supreme Commander Goodblood summons the group. He orders the commandant's men to eat, while asking the commandant and 2IC to stay behind. Goodblood discusses the changing dynamics of the war and promotes the commandant to deputy chief of security, announcing that the commandant's battalion will now be under 2IC's command. 2IC begins to thank Goodblood, but the commandant cuts him off and orders him to leave. When alone with Goodblood, the commandant confronts him about the changes. Goodblood explains that the war is gaining international attention, and that the United Nations' involvement has turned it into a battle of public perception. The commandant is clearly against these changes, but Goodblood reminds him of his duty as a soldier to obey orders. Frustrated but resigned, the commandant leaves, saying he has one more night to spend with his men. The scene shifts to the commandant and his battalion arriving at Mama's place, an old friend of the commandant. The group drinks and celebrates with women, under the pretense of honoring his and 2IC's promotions, though his tone suggests otherwise. When 2IC requests permission to check on other units, the commandant refuses. He then asks Mama for women, to which she responds that she has only women for the men, not for Agu and Strika. As the men leave with their companions, Agu and Strika are left behind to drink. Agu notices a young woman and watches her, but she shows no interest in him. Suddenly, a gunshot is heard, and the group discovers that 2IC has been accidentally shot by the woman he was with while she played with his gun. The commandant becomes enraged. The woman tries to escape, but Agu quickly shoots her, and Strika follows by shooting Mama. The scene shifts to Agu sniffing burnt gunpowder. He checks on 2IC, who tells him that everything they have done in the war has been for nothing. Meanwhile, a radio broadcast announces that the unit is being hunted. Agu informs the commandant that 2IC has died. The battalion gathers to pray over his body before leaving it behind to be consumed by worms. This moment leads Agu to realize that the only true escape from the war is death. That night, as the battalion rests, they are startled by a missile attack that kills many of their comrades. The next morning, the survivors press on, but Strika refuses to move. Agu discovers that Strika has been shot and carries him despite being physically drained. Later, Agu tries to talk to Strika, but finds that his friend has already died. Overwhelmed with grief, Agu continues forward alone. In the next scene, Agu is ordered by a soldier to fetch ammunition. He discovers there is none left and informs the commandant. Around the same time, the new 2IC approaches the commandant and expresses the soldiers' desire to leave, pointing out that they've run out of food, water, and bullets. The commandant argues that they have no life outside the war, but the new 2IC, frustrated, points a gun at him, only for the commandant to mock him, knowing the gun has no bullets. Unexpectedly, Agu points his gun at the commandant. The commandant asks Agu if he wants to surrender too, and Agu replies yes. Furious, the commandant tells them all to leave, convinced they will return after realizing their mistake. However, to his surprise, Agu also walks away with the others. The scene shifts to Agu and the others surrendering. Agu and the other young soldiers are sent to a missionary school where they receive counseling. However, Agu struggles to integrate with the other children and is haunted by nightmares. Preacher and Randy, two of Agu's comrades from the NDF, decide to run away and rejoin the war, believing the commandant's words were true. The next day, a counselor named Amy talks to Agu, encouraging him to open up. Agu hesitates, afraid that sharing his experiences will make her see him as a monster. Instead, he begins talking about his family. The movie concludes with Agu finally joining the other children for a swim, allowing himself to experience joy and fun again.